Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is Ron's Amazing Stories. We have stories that should thrill you a little and chill you a little.
It's amazing.
What you'll hear are adventures sent in by you guys, classic stories from the pulp mags, and episodes from the golden age of radio. We have special segments like Ghost Stories with Sylvia.
That's amazing.
And These Are Your Stories. So settle in for the next hour and enjoy the show. One more thing. You just might want to prepare yourself to be taken away from today.
That you say?
Hello and welcome to the podcast. On the show today, we have a plethora of stories. Short stories, to be exact. Most are science fiction and some are downright short. The shortest is a tale that includes the two creepiest sentences you'll ever hear. Yes, only two. That's all it takes for Frederick Brown to sneak up behind you, tap you on the shoulder, and whisper something that'll have you sleeping with the lights on. It is simply titled Knock. Originally published in Thriller Wonder Stories in 1948, Knock is what you get when a science fiction writer decides,
You know what this genre needs? Lots of dread served in a shot glass.
Frederick Brown, known for his twisty, punchy style and general disregard for your emotional comfort, delivered what might be the shortest horror story ever, and arguably one of the most effective. Now, I'm going to read it for you right now. Settle yourself in and get ready. It goes like this. The last man on earth sat alone in a room. There was a knock at the door. That's it. That's our first story to get us going. If that doesn't make your imagination go sprinting into a panic room, you might already be the twist. So put on your tinfoil hat, check the locks, and settle in. But maybe leave a door open a crack, just in case someone or something knocks. I'm going to call this episode of Ron's Amazing Stories The Incredible World of the Short Story. Let's get started. Well, we already talked about the story Knock, which masterfully explores the themes of loneliness, survival, and the fear of the unknown. The initial shock of the knock quickly gives way to deeper exploration of concerns and possibilities, both hopeful and terrifying. But what about the aftermath? I mean, after man is gone, what would be left on our Earth? Today we hear a lot about artificial intelligence. What if man has left that as its legacy? Now, you might think this to be a new concept, but you would be wrong. Thornton Deck thought about it way back in 1941. He came up with a story titled The Ultimate Experiment. It ran in the pulp magazine Comet in July of that year. It is a strange story that requires a bit of thought on our part. One question you might ask yourself while listening is, what does our AI think of us? Please enjoy The Ultimate Experiment.
They were all gone now, the masters, all dead and their atoms scattered to the never-ceasing winds that swept the great chrysolite city towers in ever-increasing fury. That had been the last wish of each as he had passed away, dying from sheer old age. True, they had fought on as long as they could to save their kind from utter extinction, but the comet that had trailed its poisoning wake across space to leave behind it, upon Earth, a noxious lethal gas vapor, had done its work too well. No living soul breathed upon the Earth. No one lived here now but Chiron and his kind. And so, thought Chiron to himself, he might as well be a great unthinking robot, able to do only one thing, instead of the mental giant he was. So obsessed had he become with the task he had set himself to do. Yet in spite of a great loneliness and a strong fear of a final frustration, he worked on with the others of his people, hardly stopping for anything except the very necessities needed to keep his big body working in perfect coordination. Tirelessly he worked, for the masters had bred, if that is the word to use, fatigue and the need for restoration out of his race long decades ago. Sometimes, though, he would stop his work when the great red dying sun began to fade into the west, and his round eyes would grow wistful as he looked out over the great city that stretched in towering minarets and lofty spires of purest crystal blue for miles on every side. A fairy city of rarest hue and beauty. A city for the gods, and the gods were dead. Chiron felt at such times the great loneliness that the last master must have known. They had been kind, the masters, and Chiron knew that his people, as they went about their eternal tasks of keeping the great city in perfect shape for the masters who no longer needed it, must miss them as he did. Never to hear their voices ringing, never to see them again gathered in groups to witness some game or to play amid the silver fountains and flowery gardens of the wondrous city, made him infinitely saddened. It would always be like this, unless... But thinking, dreaming, reminiscing would not bring it all back, for there was only one answer to still the longing: work. The others worked and did not dream, but instead kept busy tending to the 1,001 tasks the master had set them to do, had left them doing when the last master perished. He too must remember the trust they had placed in his hands and fulfill it as best he could. From the time the great red eye of the sun opened itself in the east, until it disappeared in the blue haze beyond the chrysolite city, Chiron labored with his fellows. Then, at the appointed hour, the musical signals would peal forth their sweet, sad chimes, whispering good night to ears that would hear them no more, and all operations would halt for the night, just as it had done when the masters were here to supervise it. Then when morning came, he would start once more trying, testing, experimenting with his chemicals and plastics, forever following labyrinth of knowledge, seeking for the great triumph that would make the work of the others of some real use. His hands molded the materials carefully, lovingly to a pattern that was set in his mind as a thing to cherish. Day by day his experiments in their liquid baths took form under his careful modeling. He mixed his chemicals with the same loving touch, the same careful concentration and painstaking thoroughness, studying often his notes and analysis charts. Everything must be just so, lest his experiment not turn out perfectly. He never became exasperated at a failure or a defect that proved to be the only reward for his faithful endeavors, but worked patiently on toward a goal that he knew would ultimately be his. Then one day, as the great red sun glowed like an immense red eye overhead, Chiron stepped back to admire his handiwork. In that instant the entire wondrous city seemed to breathe a silent prayer as he stood transfixed by the sight before him. Then it went on as usual, hurrying noiselessly about its business. The surface cars, empty though they were, fled swiftly about, supported only by the rings of magnetic force that held them to their designated paths. The gravoships raised from the tower dromes to speed silently into the eye of the red sun that was dying. No one now, Chiron thought to himself as he studied his handiwork. Then he walked unhurriedly to the cabinet in the laboratory corner and took from it a pair of earphones resembling those of a long-forgotten radio set. Just as unhurriedly, though his mind was filled with turmoil and his being with excitement, he walked back and connected the earphones to the box upon his bench. The phones dangled into the liquid bath before him as he adjusted them to suit his requirements. Slowly he checked over every step of his experiments before he went further. Then, as he proved them for the last time, his hand went slowly to the small knife switch upon the box at his elbow. Next he threw into connection the larger switch upon his laboratory wall, bringing into his laboratory the broadcast power of the chrysolite city. The laboratory generators hummed softly, drowning out the quiet hum of the city outside. As they built up, sending tiny living electrical impulses over the wires like minute currents that come from the brain, Chiron sat breathless, his eyes intent. Closer to his work he bent, watching lovingly, fearful lest all might not be quite right. Then his eyes took on a brighter light as he began to see the reaction. He knew the messages that he had sent out were being received and coordinated into a unit that would stir and grow into intellect. Suddenly the machine flashed its little warning red light and automatically snapped off. Chiron twisted quickly in his seat and threw home the final switch. This, he knew, was the ultimate test. On the results of the flood of energy impulses that he had set in motion rested the fulfillment of his success or failure. He watched with slight misgivings. This had never been accomplished before. How could it possibly be a success now? Even the masters had never quite succeeded at this final test. How could he, only a servant? Yet it must work, for he had no desire in life but to make it work. Then suddenly he was on his feet, eyes wide. From the 2 long coffin-like liquid baths, there arose 2 perfect specimens of the Homo sapiens. Man and woman they were, and they blinked their eyes in the light of the noonday sun, raised themselves dripping from the baths of their creation, and stepped to the floor before Chiron. The man spoke, the woman remained silent. "I am Adam too," he said, "created by you, Chiron, from a formula they left in their image. I was created to be a master, and she whom you also have created is to be my wife. We shall mate, and the race of man shall be reborn through us and others whom I shall help you create." The man halted at the last declaration he intoned, and walked smilingly toward the woman, who stepped into his open arms, returning his smile. Chiron smiled too, within his pumping heart. The words the man had intoned had been placed in his still pregnable mind by the teleteach phones and record that the last master had prepared before death had halted his experiments. The actions of the man toward the woman, Chiron knew, was caused by the natural constituents that went to form his chemical body and govern his humanness. He, Chiron, had created a living man and woman. The masters lived again because of him. They would sing and play and again people the magnificent chrysolite city, because he loved them and had kept on until success had been his. But then why not such a turnabout? Hadn't they, the masters, created him, a superb thinking robot?
Okay, quite the tale. But what are your thoughts after listening to that one? I couldn't help but think that our current AI would be totally lost. At least today, AI requires human input to do anything. Will that continue to be the case? I guess I hope so. Our next story is another super short one, but it is dated in that it has no connection to our world today. But in 1962, you had every reason to believe that this was real deal possible. At the time, we were in a space race, first to orbit, first to the moon, and it was no holds barred. Which makes me believe that this story is not just a work of fiction, but probably happened. Why? Well, it comes from the magazine Analog Science Fact and Science Fiction in November of 1962, which makes it possible. It is titled Technological Employment, and it was written by E.M. Clinton.
This story takes the form of a volley of teletype messages between the United States Pacific Spaceport and the White House in Washington, D.C., TWX's Teletype Writer Exchange. Untechnological Employment, subtitled, "The reaction would not have been so deeply bitter if only it hadn't worked." TWX White House to Colonel K.A. Brown, Commander, Pacific Spaceport. Congress pressure high. Investigation imminent. Must have full information why moon launches behind schedule. TWX Colonel K.A. Brown to White House. Unseasonably constant bad weather prevents launching for past 3 weeks. TWX White House to Brown PSP. What kind of bad weather? TWX Colonel K.A. Brown to White House. Fog. TWX White House to Brown PSP. Congress pressure greater. Bad publicity involved. Russians are launching on schedule. Why can't we? Something must be done. TWX Colonel K.A. Brown to White House. Still fogged in. TWX White House to Brown PSP. Chairman Senate Space Committee says fly this week or he will investigate. TWX Colonel K.A. Brown to White House. Sir, investigate. TWX White House to Colonel A.A. Newman, Commander Pacific Spaceport. Expect you to act immediately solving previous administration problems, re-launchings. TWX Colonel A.A. Newman to White House. Wish to advise fog remains. Was clear for 13 minutes this AM. Please instruct. TWX White House to Newman PSP. Senate Space Committee under Senator Harry Washwater, Arizona, due Pacific Spaceport this Friday. TWX Colonel A.A. Newman to White House. Advise you, this office regards Washwater suggestion as not acceptable. TWX White House to Newman PSP. In confidence, advise ancillary political considerations make it desirable you reevaluate Washwater recommendation. TWX Colonel A.A. Newman to White House. In confidence, ask what possible political considerations can apply here. TWX White House to Newman PSP. In confidence, high unemployment rate, Native Americans in Washwater constituency. TWX Colonel B.M. Dewar, Acting Commander, Pacific Spaceport, to White House. Advise you, Colonel Newman's death established as suicide. TWX White House to Dewar PSP. Regrets officially from this office. Now suggest reevaluation of Washwater recommendation. How is the weather? TWX Colonel B.M. Dewar to White House. Re-evaluating weather. Still unspeakably bad. Was this place evaluated for weather before spaceport facilities built? TWX White House to Dewar PSP. Official position is change in Japanese current. Anxious for your decision on Washwater recommendation. TWX Colonel B.M. Dewar to White House. Respectfully deferred decision to your office. TWX White House to Dewar PSP. Emergency forces on way from Arizona this AM per this office decision to follow Washwater recommendation. Please keep hourly information coming to this office. TWX Colonel B.M. Dewar to White House. Dancing began at 0420 PST. Every assistance being extended by this base. TWX Colonel B.M. Dewar to White House. Dancing still in progress. Chief Blue Sky declares repertoire of sun dances far from exhausted. TWX Colonel B.M. Dewar to White House. Countdown completed. Launching successful. Visibility unlimited. Weather control personnel asking for overtime. Please advise and accept my resignation.
So if that didn't happen at some point during the space race era, I would be very surprised. However, I didn't find anything in my research that would prove that it did. But then communication in the 1960s was restrictive. What do you think? Our next story deals with the medical notation that things that appear bad may have a silver lining. Take snake bites, for example. Some of the components in the venom have led to the development of ACE inhibitors, which is crucial for managing hypertension and heart failure. Hard to believe, but true. The ideal way to deal with a pest, any menace, is, of course, to make it useful to you. That is the premise of this story titled Beyond Pandora. It first appeared in Analog Magazine in September of 1962.
The doctor's pen paused over the chart on his desk. "This is your third set of teeth, I believe?" His patient nodded. "That's right, doctor. but they were pretty slow coming in this time. The doctor looked up quizzically. Is that the only reason you think you might need a booster shot? Oh no, of course not. The man leaned forward and placed one hand, palm up, on the desk. Last year I had an accident. Stupid. Lost a thumb. He shrugged apologetically. It took almost 6 months to grow back. Thoughtfully, the doctor leaned back in his chair. I see. As the man before him made an involuntary movement toward his pocket, the doctor smiled. Go on, smoke if you want to. Picking up the chart, he murmured. 6 months. Much too long. Strange we didn't catch that at the time. He read silently for a few moments, then began to fill out a form clipped to the folder. Well, I think you probably are due for another booster about now. There will have to be the usual tests. Not that there's much doubt. We like to be certain. The middle-aged man seemed relieved. Then, on second thought, he hesitated uneasily. Why? Is there any danger? Amusement flickered across the doctor's face, then turned smoothly into a reassuring half-smile. Oh no, there's absolutely no danger involved. None at all. We have tissue regeneration pretty well under control now. Still, I'm sure you understand that accurate records and data are very necessary for further research and progress. Reassured, the patient thawed and became confidential. I see. Well, I suppose it's kind of silly, but I don't much like shots. It's not that they hurt, it's just that I guess I'm old-fashioned. I still feel kind of creepy about the whole business. Slightly embarrassed, he paused and asked defensively, Is that unusual? The doctor smiled openly now. Not at all, not at all. Things have moved pretty fast in the past few years. I suppose it takes people's emotional reactions a while to catch up with developments that, logically, we accept as a matter of fact. He pushed his chair back from the desk. Maybe it's not too hard to understand. Take fire, for example. Man lived in fear of fire for a good many 100,000 years, and rightly so, because he hadn't learned to control it. The principle's the same. First, you learn to protect yourself from a thing, then control it, and eventually we learn to harness it for a useful purpose. He gestured toward the man's cigarette. Even so, man still instinctively fears fire, even while he uses it. In the case of tissue regeneration, where the change took place so rapidly, in just a generation or so, that instinctive fear is even more understandable, although quite as unjustified, I assure you. The doctor stood up, indicating that the session was ending. While his patient scrambled to his feet, hastily putting out his cigarette, the physician came around the desk. He put his hand on the man's shoulder. Relax. Take it easy. Nothing to worry about. This is a wonderful age we live in. Barring a really major accident, there's no reason you shouldn't live at least another 75 years. After all, that's a very remarkable viral complex we have doing your repair work. As they walked to the door, the man shook his head. Guess you're right, Doc. It's certainly done a good job so far, and I guess you specialists know what you're doing, even if folks don't understand it. At the door, he paused and half turned to the doctor. But say, something I meant to ask you. This stuff, this vaccine, where did it come from? Seems to me I heard somewhere that way back before you fellows got it tamed, it was something else. Dangerous. There was another name for it. Do you know what I mean? The doctor's hand tightened on the doorknob. Yes, I know, he said grimly. But not many laymen remember. Just keep in mind what I told you. With any of these things, the pattern is protection, then control, then useful application. He turned to face his patient. Back in the days before we put it to work for us, rebuilding tissue, almost ending aging and disease, the active basis for our vaccine caused a whole group of diseases in itself. Returning the man's searching gaze, the doctor opened the door. We've come a long way since then. You see, he said quietly. In those days, they called it cancer.
The thought of cancer being a good thing? Well, I guess time will tell. I, for one, hope that this story comes true. Okay, have you ever heard of the phrase, one man's garbage is another man's treasure? Well, that applies to our next story. I guess I would call this a cautionary tale, but that might be pushing it. It highlights the subjective nature of value and how different individuals or groups can have different needs, desires, and of course, preferences. It is titled Quiet Please, and it comes from the Worlds of If, November of 1961.
Groverbs knew what he wanted. Peace and quiet. He was willing to scream his head off for it. The big man eased the piano off his back and stood looking at Groverbs. "You ain't gonna like it here." He mopped his face. "Boy, will I ever be glad to get off this cockeyed planet." Groverbs pushed at his spectacles, sniffed, and said, "Quite." The big man said, "Ain't no native here over 3 feet tall, and they got some crazy kind of communication. They don't talk." Groverbs said, "Quiet." "Huh?" "Precisely why I am here," said Groverbs, sniffing again. "Loathe conversation." "Oh, well." He left. Alone, Groverbs surveyed his realm. The house was the shell of what had formerly been a Little People apartment building. Ceilings, floors, and walls had been removed to form one large room. The tiny doors and windows had been sealed, and a single window and door had been cut into the shell for Groverbs' use. Crude, but serviceable. Groverbs walked to the window and looked down the slope. Little People buildings dotted the landscape, and the people themselves scurried silently about. Yes, thought Groverbs, it would do nicely. He had brought an adequate food tablet supply. He would finish, without the distraction of voices, his beautiful concerto. He would return to Earth famous and happy. Armed with paper and pencils, he went to the piano, having decided to enlarge upon the theme in the second movement. His mind knew exactly how the passage should run, and he swiftly covered the paper with sharp, angular notes. Then he triumphantly lifted his hands and began to play what he had written. He jerked back from the keyboard, his hair on end, his teeth on edge, his ears screaming with the massive sounds he had produced. He looked at his hands, peered at the score, adjusted his spectacles, and tried again. "I'm tired," he thought, recoiling in horror from the racket. "A food tablet and a nap will remedy the situation." When he awoke, Groverbs walked to the window, refreshed. A violet glow had replaced the harsh yellow light of the day. At the foot of the slope, the Little People dashed to and fro, but no voice broke the peaceful quiet of the evening. With a sigh of satisfaction, Groverbs went to the piano. Gently, he struck the keys. Blatant, jumbled noise filled the room. Breathing hard, Groverbs rose and gingerly lifted the spinet's lid. No, nothing amiss there. Good felts, free hammers, solid sounding board. Must be out of tune. Groverbs closed the lid, sat down, and struck a single note. A clear tone sang out. He moved chromatically up and down the scale, definitely not out of tune. He shifted the score, glanced uneasily at the keys, and began to play. Discord immediately pierced his eardrums. He clapped his hands over his ears and leaped wildly from the piano bench. "The trip," he decided frantically. "It must have affected my hearing." He flung himself from the house and down the slope. The Little People scattered, staring. He charged into the administration building and clutched the lapels of a uniformed official. "A doctor," he gasped. "Now, this minute." The official raised his eyebrows and removed Groverb's hands with distaste. "It's a little late in the day," he drawled, "but maybe the doc up on the top floor." Groverbs flew up the stairs and into the doctor's office. The doctor's face lit up. "A patient!" he exclaimed. "Capital! What seems to be the trouble? Food poisoning? Shouldn't eat the food here. Garbage. Appendix? Heart attack?" "Stop talking, you idiot. It's my ears." Obviously disappointed, the doctor nevertheless poked and peered at Groverb's ears. "No," he said finally. "A trifle big, yes, but nothing wrong with them." "You're sure?" "Absolutely. A pity. I'm getting a bit rusty." With a groan, Groverbs staggered out of the building, back through town, and up the slope to his house. Seating himself firmly on the bench, he began to play. He shuddered. The noise was abominable. Suddenly his door burst open and a crowd of Little People rushed in. They pulled him off the bench and slapped angrily at his hands. Then with cutters, they attacked the piano. "Here, stop that!" Groverbs screeched. "What do you think you're doing?" The Little People pushed and dragged him out of the house, down the slope, through the town, and into the launching bowl at the space strip. The launching agent took one look and yelled, "Get the interpreter! On the double!" The interpreter ran up and whipped something from his pocket. It looked like a miniature piano skeleton. He tripped a hammer. There was a faint tinkle. Instantly, one of the little people produced a single miniature hammer and tapped it rapidly against his skull. The interpreter tripped another hammer. A second little one responded. Suddenly, one of the little people ran over and tripped all the interpreter's hammers simultaneously. The little people winced. "Oh, well, it's their planet." He hustled Groverbs out to a freight ship that was warming up for takeoff.
"Is everyone insane?"
Groverbs croaked.
"I demand to know what this is all about."
The interpreter shoved Groverbs into the ship. "They say you talk too much," he yelled as he slammed the door.
Well, to be run off a planet for talking too much. Governor knew what he wanted, peace and quiet. And as it turns out, he was willing to scream his head off for it. A very different kind of story, don't you agree? Now let's go for a tragic story with a sense of humor. But before we do, let me say this. You can see it, you can watch it, but you mustn't touch. And what could possibly be more frustrating when you need most violently to get your hands on it for just 1 second? The story is titled The Untouchable and was written by Stephen Callis. It was first published in Analog Magazine in December of 1960.
The man finally entered the office of General George Garvers. As the door closed behind him, he saw the general, who sprang from his chair to greet him. "Max, you finally came." "Got here as soon as I could. I wager half my time was taken up by the security checkpoints. You're certainly isolated in here." "All of that," agreed the general. "Have a seat, won't you?" he asked, indicating a chair. His friend sank into it gratefully. "Now what's this vital problem you called me about? You weren't too specific." "No," said Garvers, "I wasn't. This is a security matter, after a fashion. It's vitally important that we get technical help on this thing, and since you and I are friends, I was asked to call you in." "Well?" "I'm afraid I'll have to make a story of it." "Quite all right by me, but don't mind if I interject a question now and then. Mind if I smoke?" "Go right ahead," said Garvers, fumbling out a lighter. "Just don't spill ashes on the rug." This all began on the 3rd of May. I was working here on some top security stuff. I had suddenly got the feeling of being watched. I know it seems silly, what with all the checkpoints that a potential spy would have to go through to get here, but that's just how I felt. Several times I glanced around the office, but of course it was empty. Then I began to think that it was my nerves. "You always were a bit of a hypochondriac," observed his friend. "Be that as it may," continued Garvers, "it was the only explanation I had at the time. Either someone was watching me, which seemed impossible, or I was beginning to crack under the strain. Well, I put my papers away and tried to take a short break. I was reaching into my drawer where I keep magazines when, so help me, a man stepped out of the wall into my office." "What? It seems as if you just said a guy stepped out of the wall." "That's just what I did say. It sounds crazy, but let me finish, will you? I'm not kidding, and I'll show you proof later if necessary. Anyway, this bird stepped straight out of the wall as if it had been a waterfall or something, but the wall itself was undamaged. The only proof I had that he had actually done it was the fact that he was in my office, but that was proof enough. To put it mildly, I was thunderstruck. After jumping to my feet, I could only stand there like an idiot. I was so shaken that I couldn't speak a word, but he spoke first. "General Garvers?" he asked, just as if he had run into me at a cocktail party or on the street. I told him he was correct, and asked him who he was and what he wanted, and how he got into my office. He identified himself as a Henry Bush, and explained that he was acting in behalf of a good friend of his, the late Dr. Hyman Duval. Have you ever heard of Duval, Max? His friend twisted his face in thought. "I can't say that I have offhand, but the name seems to ring a bell somewhere." "Well, anyway, he said that Duval had perfected an invention of great national importance shortly before his death, and asked Bush to deliver it to the government if anything should happen to him. Then Duval died suddenly of a heart attack." "And what was this invention?" "Isn't it obvious? A machine that would enable a man to walk through walls. And Bush has no idea how the thing works, other than the general explanation that Duvall gave him. And Bush was poles apart from Duvall. They were friends from college, but not because of professional interests. It seems they were both double-crossed by the same girl. Duvall was a brilliant but obscure nuclear and radiation physicist. He was one of those once-in-a-lifetime fellows like Tesla. He was so shy that he didn't bring himself to anybody's attention, save for a few papers he published in the smaller physical societies magazines. It was only because he had inherited a considerable amount of money that he could do any research whatsoever. I seem to remember a paper about wave propagation in one of the quarterlies. Quite unorthodox, as I recall, said Max. Could be. But anyway, about Bush. Bush majored in psychology at college, but took special courses after he graduated and took a master's in English. He's written 2 novels and 3 collections of poems under various pen names. At the time of Duvall's death, he was working on the libretto of an opera. He has no technical training, unless you want to count a year of high school general science, so it wasn't too much help in explaining how Duvall's instrument works. And just to make matters more juicy, Duvall kept no notes. He had total recall, and a childlike fear of putting anything into writing that had not been experimentally verified. And this machine, how's it supposed to work? Garvers got up and began to pace. According to Bush, Duvall devised the instrument after stumbling into an entirely new branch of physics. This device of Duvall's is a special case of a new theory of matter and energy. Matter is made up of subnuclear particles, electrons, protons, and the like. However, Duvall said that these particles are in turn made up of much smaller particles grouped together in aggregate clouds. The size ratio of these particles to protons is something like the ratio of an individual proton to a large star. They seem to be composed of tiny clots of energy from a fantastically complex energy system, in which electromagnetism is but a small part. Each energy segment is represented by a different facet of each particle, and the arrangement of the individual particles to each other determines what superparticle they'll form, such as an electron. Duvall called these subparticles LEMs. Bush says that he was told that a field of a special nature could be generated so as to make the individual LEMs of the particle of matter rotate in a special way that would introduce a polarization field, as Duvall called it. This field seems to be connected somehow with gravity, but Bush doesn't know how. The upshot is that matter in the initial presence of the field is affected so that it's able to pass through ordinary matter. Hold on, interrupted Max. If a device can do that, then the user would immediately fall toward the center of the Earth. Just you hold on. You didn't let me finish. A single plane of atoms at the base of the treated object is the point of contact. It remains partially unaffected because it is the closest to the gravitas-static field center, which I guess is the Earth's center of attraction. This plane of semi-treated atoms can be forced through an object if it's moved horizontally, but its untreated aspect prevents the subject wearing the device from falling through the floor. Bush demonstrated this device to me, turning it on and strolling through various objects in the room. Think of it. No soldiers could be killed or held prisoner, and...
No, hang on, objected Max. Let's not run away with ourselves. He may have perfected a device that would enable a soldier to avoid capture, but there would certainly be other ways to kill him than by bullets. Let's see now. Suppose that the enemy shot a flamethrower at him. The materials might pass through him, but he would be cooked anyway. Or poison gas.
As far as gas goes, I suppose a gas mask would be necessary. Bush doesn't know about the breathing mechanism, except that he had to take breaths. But as far as fire or radiation goes, the man's protected. If the radiation is either harmful by nature or by amount, the field merely reflects it. It's something called the lemic stress of the field that causes the phenomenon. That's why we need your help.
Max scratched his head thoughtfully. I don't understand.
Garvers looked pained.
When Bush had finished his demonstration, he carelessly tossed the device on my desk. The thing skidded and hit my paperweight so that the switch was thrown on again. So now the device and my desk are both untouchable. Go over to the desk and try to touch it, said Garvers dryly.
His friend got up and ambled over to the desk. There he saw a small black box resting near a paperweight. Its toggle switch was at the on position, and it was lying on its side. He tried to pick the box up, but his hand slid effortlessly through it as if it were so much air.
Well, Max said.
He passed his hand through the desk again.
Well, are you sure Bush told you everything? Bush.
He honestly wants to help, and we have taken him through the mill. Pentothal, scopolamine and the like, hypnotism and the polygraph. We've dug that man deeper than we've ever dug anybody before. And have you conducted any experiments of your own? Certainly. That's what's so frustrating. We tried to x-ray the thing, and we didn't get a thing. We bombarded it with every radiation we could think of, from radio to gamma, and it just reflected them. We can detect no radiation coming out of it. Magnetic fields don't affect it, nor the heat and cold. Nuclear particles are ignored by it. It just sits there, thumbing its nose at us, and we can't even wait for it to run down. According to Bush, the power requirements of the thing are funny, and once the field is established, it takes no additional energy to maintain it. And the collapsing power remains indefinitely until it's time to turn the machine off, but it's unreachable by any means we have. It's pure frustration. There's no way we can analyze it until we can handle it, and there's no way we can handle it until we can turn it off, and there's no way we can turn it off until we've analyzed it. If it were alive, I think that it was laughing at us. Do you have any ideas? Asked Garvers hopefully. Nothing that would help a solution at present, said Max. But do you remember the legend of King Tantalus? Slightly. What about it? Well, if he were here, said Max thoughtfully, he'd sympathize.
Okay, the only thing that bothered me about that one was the King Tantalus reference at the end of the story. It was lost on me, and I had to look it up. It turns out that he was a Greek mythological figure, most famous for revealing many of the secrets of the gods. His punishment was that he had to stand in a pool of water beneath a fruit tree with low branches. However, the fruit was just out of his grasp, and the water was always receding before he could take a drink. This led to the Greek proverb about those who have good things but are not permitted to enjoy them. It is also the origin of the word tantalize. Let's move to our last story of the day. This one is a creepy tale about a bad man getting his just dessert. He was already a thief, prepared to steal again. What he didn't know is that this time he himself was the booty. This one comes from the magazines The World of If, published in January of 1952. It is titled An Incident on Route 12.
Phil Garfield was 30 miles south of the little town of Redmond on Route 12 when he was startled by a series of sharp clanking noises. They came from under the Packer's hood. The car immediately began to lose speed. Garfield jammed down the accelerator, had a sense of sick helplessness at the complete lack of response from the motor. The Packard rolled on, getting rid of its momentum, and came to a stop. Phil Garfield swore shakily. He checked his watch, switched off the headlights, and climbed out into the dark road. A delay of even half an hour here might be disastrous. It was past midnight, and he had another 110 miles to cover to reach the small private airfield where Madge waited for him and the $30,000 in the suitcase on the Packard's front seat. If he didn't make it before daylight. He thought of the bank guard. The man had made a clumsy play at being a hero, and that had set the fool woman who had run screaming into their line of fire. One dead, perhaps two. Garfield hadn't stopped to look at an evening paper, but he knew they were hunting for him. He glanced up and down the road. No other headlights in sight at the moment, no light from a building showing on the forested hills. He reached back into the car and brought out a suitcase, his gun, a big flashlight, and the box of shells which had been standing beside the suitcase. He broke the box open, shoved a handful of shells and the .38 into his coat pocket, then took suitcase and flashlight over to the shoulder of the road and set them down. There was no point in groping about under the Packard's hood. When it came to mechanics, Phil Garfield was a moron and well aware of it. The car was useless to him now, except as bait. But as bait, it might be very useful. Should he leave it standing where it was? No, Garfield decided. To anybody driving past, it would merely suggest a necking party, or a drunk sleeping off his load before continuing home. He might have to wait an hour or more before somebody decided to stop. He didn't have the time. He reached in through the window, hauled the top of the steering wheel toward him, and put his weight against the rear window frame. The Packard began to move slowly backwards at a slant across the road. In a minute or two, he had it in position, not blocking the road entirely, which would arouse immediate suspicion, but angled across it, lights out, Empty. Both front doors open and inviting a passerby's investigation. Garfield carried the suitcase and flashlight across the right-hand shoulder of the road, and moved up among the trees and undergrowth of the slope above the shoulder. Placing the suitcase between the bushes, he brought out the .38, clicked the safety off, and stood waiting. Some 10 minutes later, a set of headlights appeared speeding up Route 12 from the direction of Redmond. Phil Garfield went down on one knee before he came within range of the lights. Now he was completely concealed by the vegetation. The car slowed as it approached, braking nearly to a stop 60 feet from the stalled Packard. There were several people inside it. Garfield heard voices, then a woman's loud laugh. The driver tapped his horn inquiringly twice, moved the car slowly forward. As the headlights went past him, Garfield got to his feet among the bushes, took a step down towards the road, raising the gun. Then he caught the distant gleam of a second set of headlights approaching from Redmond. He swore under his breath and dropped back out of sight. The car below him reached the Packard, edged cautiously around it, rolled on with a sudden roar of acceleration. The second car stopped when still 100 yards away, the Packard caught in the motionless glare of its lights. Garfield heard the steady purring of a powerful motor. For almost a minute nothing else happened. Then the car came gliding smoothly on, stopped again no more than 30 feet to Garfield's left. He could see it now through the screening bushes, a big job, a long, low four-door sedan. The motor continued to purr. After a moment, a door on the far side of the car opened and slammed shut. A man walked quickly out into the beam of the headlights and started towards the Packard. Phil Garfield rose from his crouching position, the .38 in his right hand, flashlight in his left. If the driver was alone, the thing was now cinched. But if there was somebody else in the car, somebody capable of fast, decisive action, a slip in the next 10 seconds might cost him the sedan, and quite probably his freedom and life. Garfield lined up the .38 sights steadily on the center of the approaching man's head. He let his breath out slowly as the fellow came level with him in the road, and squeezed off one shot. Instantly he went bounding down the slope to the road. The bullet had flung the man sideways to the pavement. Garfield darted past him to the left, crossed the beam of the headlights, and was in darkness again on the far side of the road, snapping on his flashlight as he sprinted up to the car. The motor hummed quietly on. The flashlight showed the seats empty. Garfield dropped the light, jerked both doors open and turned, gun pointing into the car's interior. Then he stood still for a moment, weak and almost dizzy with relief. There was no one inside. The sedan was his. The man he had shot through the head lay face down on the road, his hat flung a dozen feet away from him. Route 12 still stretched out in dark silence to east and west. There should be time enough to clean up the job before anyone else came along. Garfield brought the suitcase down and put it on the right front seat of the sedan, then started back to get his victim off the road and out of sight. He scaled the man's hat into the bushes, bent down, grasped the ankles, and started to haul him towards the left side of the road where the ground dropped off sharply beyond the shoulder. The body made a high, squealing sound and began to writhe violently. Shocked, Garfield dropped the legs and hurriedly took the gun from his pocket, moving back a step. The squealing noise rose in intensity as a wounded man quickly flopped over twice like a struggling fish, arms and legs sawing about with startling energy. Garfield clicked off the safety, pumped 3 shots into his victim's back. The grisly squeals ended abruptly. The body continued to jerk for another second or two, then lay still. Garfield shoved the gun back into his pocket. The unexpected interruption had unnerved him. His hand shook as he reached down again for the stranger's ankles. Then he jerked his hands back and straightened up, staring. From the side of the man's chest a few inches below the right arm, something like a black thick stick 3 feet long protruded now from the material of the coat. It shone gleaming wetly in the light from the car. Even in that first uncomprehending instant, something in its appearance brought a surge of sick disgust to Garfield's throat. The stick bent slowly halfway down its length, forming a sharp angle, and its tip opened into what could have been 3 blunt black claws which scrabbled clumsily against the pavement. Very faintly, the squealing began again, and the body's back arched up as if another stick-like arm were pushing desperately against the ground beneath it. Garfield acted in a blur of horror. He emptied the .38 into the thing at his feet almost without realizing he was doing it. Then, dropping the gun, he seized one of the ankles, ran backward into the shoulder of the road, dragging the body behind him. In the darkness at the edge of the shoulder, he let go of it, stepped around to the other side, and with 2 frantically savage kicks sent the body plunging over the shoulder and down the steep slope beyond. He heard it crash through the bushes for some seconds, then stop. He turned and ran back to the sedan, scooping up his gun as he went past. He scrambled into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut behind him. His hand shook violently on the steering wheel as he pressed down the accelerator. The motor roared into life and the big car surged forward. He edged it past the Packard, cursing aloud in horrified shock. Jammed down the accelerator and went flashing up Route 12, darkness racing beside and behind him. What had it been? Something that wore what seemed to be a man's body like a suit of clothes, moving the body as a man moves, driving a man's car, roach-armed, roach-legged itself. Garfield drew a long, shuddering breath. Then, as he slowed for a curve, there was a spark of reddish light in the rearview mirror. He stared at the spark for an instant, braked the car to a stop, rolled down the window, and looked back. Far behind him along Route 12, a fire burned, approximately at the point where the Packard had stalled out, where something had gone rolling off into the road into the bushes. Something, Garfield added mentally, that found fiery automatic destruction when death came to it, so that its secrets would remain unrevealed. But for him the fire meant the end of a nightmare. He rolled the window up, took out a cigarette, lit it, and pressed the accelerator. In incredulous fright, he felt the nose of the car tilt upwards, headlights sweeping up from the road into the trees. Then the headlights winked out. Beyond the windshield, dark tree branches floated down towards him, the night sky beyond. He reached frantically for the door handle. A steel wrench clamped silently about each of his arms, drawing them in against his sides, immobilizing him there. Garfield gasped, looked up at the mirror, and saw a pair of faintly gleaming red eyes watching him from the rear of the car. Two of the things. The second one stood behind him out of sight, holding him. They had been in what had seemed to be a trunk compartment, and they had come out. The eyes in the mirror vanished. A moist black roach arm reached over the back of the seat beside Garfield, picked up the cigarette he had dropped, extinguished it with rather horribly human motions, then took up Garfield's gun and drew it back out of sight. He expected a shot, but none came. One doesn't fire a bullet through the suit one intends to wear. It wasn't until that thought occurred to him that tough Phil Garfield began to scream. He was still screaming minutes later when, beyond the windshield, the spaceship floated into view among the stars.
And there you have it, my friends. An incredible journey through the world of short stories, filled with twists, turns, and thought-provoking tales. From the chilling brevity of Frederick Brown's Knock to the eerie justice served in an incident on Route 12. We've explored the vast range of emotions and ideas that the short story format can deliver. I hope these stories sparked your imagination, made you ponder the possibilities, and maybe even sent a shiver down your spine. Whether it was contemplating AI's perception of humanity, the hidden benefits of medical discoveries, or the existential dread of being untouchable, each story offered a unique lens into the human condition and beyond. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Ron's Amazing Stories, the incredible world of the short story. Until next time, keep your mind open, your curiosity alive, and maybe, just maybe, leave the door open a crack. You never know what might come knocking. Stay safe, stay curious, and as always, keep listening. Ron's Amazing Stories is brought to you by Audible. Ever wanted to time travel, visit alien worlds, or maybe stop the machine before it stops you? Now you can, without leaving your armchair or spaceship bunk. Audible is your portal to imagination, adventure, and yes, a free trial worthy of the best sci-fi minds. For a limited time, you can get a 30-day free trial and one audiobook of your choice, absolutely free. Just head over to audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories, and you're in. Do you need a suggestion? How about Science Fiction Collection, a galaxy-spanning anthology featuring Ray Bradbury's Easy Rocket Summer, Isaac Asimov's Brainy Youth, E.M. Forrester's chilling The Machine Stops, and H.G. Wells' legendary Time Machine. And that's just the beginning. We're talking 20 classic stories from the founding minds of modern sci-fi. Ethics, AI, dystopia, time travel. Hey, they dreamed it all before your smart speaker could pronounce algorithm. Whether you're a longtime lover of the genre or boldly listening where you've never listened before, this anthology has something that'll rocket your brain into orbit. So go ahead, start your journey today at audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories. Because the future may be uncertain, but your next great listen, well, that's guaranteed. Audible, fueling imagination since before the machines took over.
Everywhere you go, across the country trip or across the street party, you carry the fun with you when you own a Columbia stereophonic high-fidelity phonograph. There's a marvelous selection of 7 new portable models in smart new color combinations at your Columbia phonograph dealer from which you may choose. Each one is a masterpiece of design and beauty. More quality, more features, and more styling have been built into these sturdy portables than ever before. How much fun you'll have enjoying all the wonderful new sound of stereo records. Regular records take on new beauty, too, when played on handsome Columbia portables. You'll be amazed at the big console sound that is reproduced by Columbia portable stereophonic high-fidelity phonographs. You'll thrill to the excitement of Stereo One by Columbia, number 1 in the wonderful world of sound. And Columbia portables are economical, too. Prices start as low as $24.95. See them and hear them at your Columbia phonograph dealer.
Seems as though the whole country's talking about the great 1954. Listen to what C.W. DeCandre, a resort owner in Daytona, Florida, one of more than 420,000 delighted new Ford owners, has to say about Ford station wagons.
Our resort has had nothing but Ford station wagons, and I'm convinced that the new 50 model is the best of all. It has the real passenger car comfort, which is important to our guests, and when you take out the rear seats, you have the perfect hauling vehicle. Tell you something else. I think the 50 Ford station wagon has a certain air about it that the others just can't match. It's so easy to keep new looking, too. Just a wash now and then, and you'd think we'd bought a new.
Ford dealers hear praise like this every day, and they want you to get that fine Ford feel, too. They want you to stop in and test drive the Ford for 50. And while you're there, get the facts on Ford economy. You'll discover the new Ford is low in initial cost, high in resale value, thrifty on gas and oil, and inexpensive to maintain. Yes, first and last, the new Ford is designed to save you money. See it. Test drive it tomorrow.
That was episode number 692, and I want to thank you for listening. If you have any thoughts or just liked the show today, I would love to hear from you. It's always nice to know what you think. If you want to follow the podcast or the blog, head to ronsamazingstories.com. There you will find any of the links I mentioned and how to contact us. Do you want to help the show? The best thing you can do is to tell your friends all about it, and please leave reviews or feedback wherever you listen. Clicking that follow or like button helps us grow. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come again to find out what are Ron's Amazing Stories.
All of the vintage audio used in the podcast is believed to be in the public domain. Ron's Amazing Stories does not own the rights to any of the old-time radio used here. If you hold the rights to any of the shows played, please contact us immediately at ronsamazingstories.com.